We're going to move right on to part 3 of land, lease, and contracts. We're now going to switch gears and talk a little bit about residential leasing in Massachusetts. Residential leasing has its own particular nuances. It's similar to commercial leasing, but not exactly the same, and I think it behooves you to brush up on it a little bit. Let's move on to the first slide. First thing we need to know is there needs to be a leasing agreement contract. Now, as covered in another module in these lessons, this 12-hour continuing education lessons, there cannot be, first of all, any sort of discrimination in leasing property for the sake of residential occupancy, meaning it's the protected classes again, the 7 classes. You can't discriminate based on any of the criteria covered in another lesson. For instance, race, creed, color, national origin, what parish you belong to, what synagogue you belong to. Any of those things cannot enter into it. It can't be in the advertising, and it can't be in the reality of showing these properties to anybody that comes along. The best policy to your office, I believe, is show them all. Show them all within their price range, all the apartments, all the single-family homes, all the two-family homes that they qualify for, and let the customer make up their own mind which one they want to eventually occupy, assuming, of course, if they qualify financially. Now, concentrating back on this slide. A couple main categories of leases. One is the tenant at will, and the second is the standard residential lease agreement. The standard agreement, let's go at this backwards. Standard agreement is typically a 12-month agreement with that can normally be extended, or very common practice is it is a standard lease agreement for the first 12 months, and then if the parties want to continue, it actually automatically becomes a tenant in will for the next 12 months. It does not have to. It can go 2 different ways, at least 2 different ways at the end of the first 12 months. There can be another written lease agreement for another year or for another specified amount of time, or if nothing is said, it can automatically become a tenant at will, whether that's a 30-day agreement, renewable every 30 days, unless the chain is broken by notice from one party to the other. Now, I'll mention here, when I say notice by one party to another, when it switches to a tenant at will, either party can terminate the agreement with at least 30 days notice prior to the next rental payment period. So, a little bit complicated, but those of you in the business, I don't think it's very complicated at all. Let's say that the payment of rent is due on January 1st, and one of the parties wants to terminate the at-will agreement. At-will technically means that each side is there because they want to be. It is their will. The landlord wants to lease to this couple or this person or this family, and the family or the couple or the single want to lease this apartment from them or this single family home. It's pretty simple. Now, to break that chain, whether the landlord wants to break it or the tenant wants to break it, this is what has to happen. Back to what I said, January 1st is the anniversary, and it's an at-will situation every 30 days. Prior to January 1st, meaning sometime in December or before December, typically sometime in December, one party has to notify the other that it's their intention to break this lease as of February 1st. So there's a full 30-day notice, that's the entire month of January, and then the extra days in December that allow for that full 30-day. Hopefully that's clear to you. So it has to be a minimum 30 days, 31 days in some months, and hopefully a good cushion, maybe 10 days, 12 days, 30 days in front of that, so each party can react, find new housing, find new tenants, and so forth and so on, turn over the apartment. Now, it's not all that easy. Let's move on to the second bullet here. There's a lead law notification, and this comes out of the Massachusetts legislature giving fair warning. The intent is to give fair warning to tenants, in particular tenants with children under 6, that there could be lead paint, could have been lead paint used in the construction of this unit, this apartment, this single-family home, back when it was built. In fact, if it was built prior to 1978, and the farther back you go, the more likely it is that there is lead paint. I would venture to say that a house built in the 50s and the 40s has a very good chance of had lead paint used to cover the surfaces in that house, because that was the norm back then. Latex hadn't come along yet. Manufacturers and contractors did not know they were doing something wrong, or something that would eventually be found wrong, using lead paint. So it was the normal thing to use. It could be very similar to something about PVC or PEX or copper or anything we use in construction today. Maybe someday it'll be found that it was detrimental to our health then and detrimental to our health currently. And then the laws will have to change and the notifications will have to change. That's the way we stand with the lead paint law. So, to adjust for that, the Massachusetts legislature believes that prospective tenants need to know in advance, before signing a lease, that this apartment may or may not contain lead, and it did contain lead at one time, but it's been handled properly, and there's a de-lead certificate on file. Now, what does that mean, de-lead certificate? Well, let's use an example to drive the point home. In a city or town, let's pick Revere in Massachusetts. Not trying to pick on them, it just came to my mind. In the health department in Revere, chances are, I've never been to that health department, I don't think, but I'm just using them as an example, there's a place to apply for a de-leading certificate. And that means that the owner of the property has gone through the proper steps, which we will not elaborate on today, to have the apartment or the single-family home de-leaded. It may include encapsulating the lead. It may include removing the lead from the walls, from the trim, from the window trim, the door trim, the walls themselves. The walls may have been gutted and new sheetrock put up. I'm not sure what we're going to use in this example, but the point is the lead cannot be within reach of these small children who might ingest it and then become gravely ill. So that's what this is all about, is finding a way to the landlords to get their de-leading certificate in any legal manner possible. On top of de-leading, I'm making sure the property is safe. The owner of the property, the landlord themselves, or through their real estate agents, that's where we come in, need to present a form to the prospective tenants saying that this property, and the form elaborates a little bit, says this property was built prior to 1978 and likely contains lead, or did once contain lead, now it's been taken care of, evidenced by this certificate, and so forth and so on. This document, the lead paint notification document, is mandatory regardless of the lead status of the apartment. So this conversation needs to happen even if the apartment has been cleansed or encapsulated or the lead has been removed in some fashion. Another heading that we're going to go into here, bullet number 3, is apartment condition statement. This document allows the renter to note any issues with an apartment at the time of moving in. So this assumes that this apartment has been shown, that the lead paint notification already exists, and the parties have come to an agreement. For instance, we'll rent you this unit for $1,500 a month, starting at so-and-so date, payments due on this date. And the next logical step is, let's take a look at the condition of the apartment. This is vitally important to both sides. Apartment condition statement. Let's say from the renter's standpoint, the lessee, the person that's going to move into the apartment. They should not be responsible for damage already done to the unit. And that's the spirit behind this portion of the bylaws to do with rental real estate. They should not be responsible for things they didn't do. They haven't had a chance to damage the property under this example because they haven't moved in yet. So there could be, for instance, a hole in the ceiling in one of the bedrooms that used to be used for a pool table. Somebody inadvertently or purposely, who knows, stuck the pool cue right through the ceiling, maybe several times. And maybe this new renter is in such a hurry that they can't wait for this to be repaired, so they just tell the landlord, listen, I'll just overlook that. I'll put a star or a moon or some sort of decal over that thing, and I'm just going to ignore it. I need to move in now, which is fine, but it should be noted here on the apartment condition statement. Why should it be noted? Because that person moving in today should not be responsible for the sins of the past. Yes, they can disguise it, but they shouldn't have to have it repaired out of their security deposit a year from now or 5 years from now. So that's why the importance of this apartment condition statement. So we'll go into it a little bit later on a subsequent slide, but to go over it a little bit now, touch on it. This can be as simple as a couple of blank pages brought in, put on the countertop, and you go room to room and you say, dining room, fine, move-in condition. Or dining room, scratches to the built-in cabinet, looks like dog scratches on the lower end of the built-in cabinet. Or, like I said, looks like pool cue through ceiling, or broken window on the middle window, second pane, or something that memorializes the fact that this new person moving in did not cause this damage. Broken lock, broken window sash, elbow through wall, doorknob through wall. Anything that happens, there should be a rough sketch of the room with arrows pointing to the damage. And if you can possibly get along enough to agree with this, both the landlord and the new tenant initial the damage on the paper, and then make a duplicate copy, one for each end of it. Let's hope that's the way it's done. It's not, in practice, that's not always the way it's done. Many times people acknowledge this needs to be done in the next 10 days, and then it never happens. It just keeps procrastination takes over. It never happens. I said it was important to both sides. Let me tell you how it can be important to the landlord. If the landlord does not initiate this, does not follow through in some way, and present the renter with a apartment condition statement within the first 10 days, let's be reasonable, 11 days or 12 days doesn't make any difference, but as the law reads, it's the first 10 days of their tenancy. If the landlord does not provide this statement and send it to the renter, then the landlord cannot, for any reason, hold back that deposit, the security deposit given to them at the end of the lease, because there's no statement, there's no way of telling what is new damage, what is old damage, whose pool cue it was. There's going to be he said, she said, he said. It's going to be a mess at the end. So this is a very important step on both ends. We'll get back into that a little bit later on. There also needs to be a receipt of all funds paid with the lease. This is a receipt for the security deposit, a receipt for the last month. Sometimes it's first and last and security. All of these things need to be placed in a receipt. It can be even, again, be a blank piece of paper with the name of the parties, the amount, the date, and the signatures or the initials of both parties. Example given here on this slide is first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit. There should be a receipt. It should be given from the landlord to the renter. Next slide. Brokerage fee disclosure. This is a statement from the broker. If there's a broker involved, let me back up. If this is a 2-family, 3-family, or even a 20 or 30 unit building where the renter is being shown the apartment by the owner of the building or an agent of the owner of the building as a regular job, and there's no brokerage fee, this doesn't come into play at all. This comes into play when an owner of a building or an owner of an apartment or a house hires a broker to show that house and successfully lease it to you or to the renter. This is where, at the first meeting between the broker, the real estate broker, the real estate professional, salesperson, meets the person that could be a renter at their office or out in the street or at some parking lot, and then begins the tour, they need to let that person know, the prospective renter, that there could be a fee attached to each one of these units. And as they enter a unit, they should say, there is no fee attached to this unit, or there is a fee attached to it. It's 1 month's rent, or it's $800 or $1,000, and who is expected to pay it, whether it's the owner of the building that's expected to pay it, or the successful renter, or a split between the two. This needs to be disclosed up front at the first meeting between the real estate professional, the real estate broker or salesperson, and the tenant. All right, we're going to go into the leasing agreement contract. I'm going to switch gears again here. Go into some of the details of the contract. It should be known that this is a binding contract between the lessor and the lessee, and should contain several stipulations. Stipulations refers to agreements between parties. Number one, it should identify the premises as to be distinguished from every other premises, theoretically, in Massachusetts or in the world. Now, you can identify it in any means legal, and there's a couple example descriptions here. And the first description is 891 Mass Ave in Cambridge, Mass. It has a zip code, and it consists of 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, and bathroom. Now, what I find lacking here is it doesn't say whether it's a single-family home, an apartment, whether there are other apartments in the building. So it should have apartment A or apartment B if it's a multi-building, or something further. It should also, in some cases, have the square feet if it doesn't have the apartment number. A second example description is right here. All rooms known and numbered as apartment 8. Okay, I like that. Same address, 891 Mass Ave. Okay, I think I like this one a little bit better. There's no formal must be this way and no other way. It simply needs to be distinguished from every other apartment possible. Now, why? Because when you're making out a contract like this contract is typically one that's what they call an adhesion contract. It's already made out with several blanks throughout the contract to fill in the parties' names and the dates and the description of the property and so forth and so on. But as long as you have all of the things needed to make a valid contract, which is the subject of another lesson, this thing can be done on the hood of a car with a blank piece of paper, and you do your best to name all of the requirements. Meaning, off the top of my head, I'll say you need to have the date today, as well as the move-in date, as well as the date the rent is due, and the beginning of the lease, the end of the lease, the parties to the lease, meaning this lease is between, I don't know, ABC Realty and Mr. and Mrs. Jones, whatever it happens to be. It's important to get these things right. signatures of both parties, meaning one party is willing to rent and the other one is willing to rent to that party. All those things can be done on a blank sheet of paper. It takes some time, or you can take the easy route, and that is get an adhesion contract and just fill in the blanks. It's a way of guiding you through the terminology needed. All right, joint and severally clause. We're still stuck on leasing agreement contracts, and at some point you're going to find, more than likely, this clause in the contract that each of the tenant is jointly and severally responsible for this lease. And right here it says liable for the rent. Now, jointly and severally, it's worth us spending a couple minutes on. Now, just to drive home this point, we are going to say Mr. Trump Jr. and Mr. Rockefeller Jr., two young men going to college in Boston, are roommates, and they're looking for an apartment, and they settle an apartment with you. And when you have them sign, each of them sign successfully, and there's this phrase in here that my mouse is pointing at. It says joint and severally. What this means in this case is Mr. Trump alone and Mr. Trump jointly with Mr. Rockefeller, these 21-year-olds, are both responsible alone and both responsible together. Here's what it doesn't mean. It does not mean that each is responsible for half of the rent. That's the joint and severalty clause. So, going to bullet number 1, lessor may sue just one person for the full rent amount. Well, as I say, somebody in the Trump family and somebody in the Rockefeller family can probably afford this apartment in the college area of Boston. However, the landlord, if they do not get the money, if they get stiffed for the money somehow, is not obliged to sue both kids. They can pick one and sue them for the entire amount, because it gets back to this clause right here. Back to when they signed this agreement, this leasing agreement, it stipulated that they are both individually and jointly responsible. So the lessor may sue or may chase down or may ruin the credit of both of them, of one of them, or any co-signer, if there is one at that point. Who knows? The landlord does not take the bill and divide it in half or in thirds. And that gets to bullet number 3. Residential leasing agreements consider all individuals on a lease as one entity, which means the landlord is not obliged and probably will not accept half the rent from Mr. Trump and half the rent from Mr. Rockefeller. The landlord is making a mistake if they do that. They're actually giving up some of their rights to consider them jointly. Now, I've seen landlords take rent that way, just because some of the money is better than none of the money, but it's a mistake to do this. They should be considered one entity, and the landlord has rights to consider them one entity. Next slide. A fixed term lease within the written agreement, as I stated earlier, should specify the commencement date as well as the termination date. And there's an example given here. 12 months, term of 12 months beginning September 1st and terminating on the last day of August, actually. Fair enough. Tenant will, this portion of the printing in red here says that the tenant will agreements do not contain termination dates. They only contain beginning on February 1st, and the termination is when the parties agree down the line or disagree down the line and end it. All leases must contain a rent amount and when the leasee is required to pay it. As an example given, the rent for the term, meaning for the year, is $19,800, payable installments, equal installments, usually the word is put in there, of $16.50 on the first day of every month. Simple enough, fair enough, enforceable. It cannot be left to chance. That's what this slide is trying to tell you. It must be specific. This amount due on this day. All right, next slide. Owners of rental properties. This is something we touched on before. Let's just go over one more time to make sure we have this down. Owners of rental properties built before 78 must acquire certificates of stating that the premises is lead-free or under interim control. Interim control may be some sort of way that the city has agreed with, that they can rent to an individual who has a family, and that family has kids under 6. The person themselves under 6 cannot sign a lease. Obviously, they don't have the capacity to sign an adult lease, but they're the innocent victims of what the adults do, or the innocent beneficiaries of what the adults do. So the adults need to take all precautions to protect these youngsters. And interim control might be some sort of encapsulating or some sort of petition or something that protects the youngsters from getting to the lead. We're still continuing the lead notification law. If a rental property is not de-leaded, the owner is obligated by law to incur the cost of getting the unit de-leaded. Where this comes into play is, let's just make up an example. Person puts property in the Boston Globe for rent or on Craigslist for rent and says, caution, 3-family dwelling, however, is not de-leaded, so no children, please. Somebody, a broker or a real estate professional or a private party shows this property, the people fall in love with it, they want to rent it, they do have young kids, or mother is pregnant with their first child. We got a problem here because the owner is obligated, not the renter. That's what this slide is telling you. It is not the happy couple or the person that's pregnant or the husband or the boyfriend or the kids or anybody other than the owner of the property is obliged by law to incur the cost of getting the unit de-leaded. Simple as that. It's been tested. It's been enforced. Now, to make it a little bit easier, there are, in Massachusetts, 0 interest loans available to owners who want to de-lead their property. So this does create a financial hardship. The bigger the house, the bigger the hardship, the bigger the property. This could be a 20 or 30 or 40 unit building that needs to be de-leaded. To mitigate the impact on the owners, the Commonwealth has made available interest-free loans to try and get these properties de-leaded. We're staying on the lead law notification. The de-lead certificate cannot be just manufactured by the landlord. This de-lead certificate can only be provided by a lead inspection licensed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's yet another license authorized by the Commonwealth. Lead is very, very hazardous, especially when airborne. Special permits need to be pulled before de-leading a property. What this is pointing out is a landlord, let's say it's a 3-family house, notices or is being enforced to de-lead a particular unit, let's say unit 2, and they've hired a contractor or they've decided to do this themselves or whatever special circumstance they've decided to let's say demo the walls, demo the woodwork and so forth and replace it. It's not that simple. The process of de-leading this unit will send the lead particles or some of the lead particles airborne, and the occupants on the 3rd floor and on the first floor of this unit, and maybe if this is one of those units that's butt right against the next one, like a 6 family with really just 2-3 families butting each other, this stuff could go airborne and contaminate somebody in the next door unit, a neighbor. So precautions need to be taken. This is all stipulated by the EPA. It's all laid out how to properly do this. Permits need to be pulled, and the intent of the permits is to make sure that somebody, a professional, is doing this that knows how to contain the area. It can be likened to taking care of asbestos in a residential area. Same problem. If you don't do it properly, you don't take out the permits and have the inspections done, and a non-professional does it, let's say, what happens is particles can land on the ledges of the trim work, or on the ledges of the windows and doors and appliances and things like that. New tenant moves in and does a thorough cleaning, and let's say, and in this example, they wipe the top of the windows or the top of the appliances or the kitchen cabinets or the, I don't know, medicine cabinet, and they send all of this lead airborne, and they're infected by it, and more harmfully, their kids are infected by it, because this is tough on kids. It affects them during their growing years, during their formative years, and could affect their brains. So the point of this bullet is simply special permits need to be taken, and this needs to be done by a professional who will issue or will cause to be issued the delaying certificate. All right, I finally see the clock in the corner here. I am at the end of part 3 of this lesson, and we'll take a break and we'll get back to part 4 shortly. Thank you.